Growing up Jewish on Long Island, I never heard of a completed Jew until I became a believer in Jesus. That's when a Christian friend explained to me that by believing in Jesus as Messiah, I was now completed. But when I shared this with some rabbis, they weren't too happy with me. I mean, after all, if I was now complete through faith in Jesus, that meant that Judaism was an incomplete religion. Is it? It was the political commentator Ann Coulter who stirred up quite a controversy when she told the Jewish host of a TV interview that all Jews should become Christians and that Jews needed to be perfected. Well, not only was the Jewish host offended, calling her remarks anti-Semitic, but she caused quite a firestorm. A leading rabbi called on her to renounce her comments. A Jewish host of a national radio show railed on her. A major Jewish organization called for a boycott of all Ann Coulter books and interviews. People were pretty hot. But the real question is, was she right? Do Jews need to be perfected? In which case Judaism is an imperfect religion? Well, if it is, how has Judaism preserved our people through 2,000 years of exile and through persecutions and banishments and a Holocaust? How is this allegedly incomplete religion? How has it kept our people united without a homeland for 20 centuries? And how do we explain the spiritual depth and beauty of the teachings and the traditions? Perhaps there's some things that many Christians just don't know about Judaism. Perhaps it's the perception that some Christians have about Judaism that's actually incomplete.
Just wondering, have you ever heard of the term completed Jew?
I'm not sure. I don't know what that means.
Completed Jew? No.
No.
No, I've never heard of nothing like that.
I heard about the term completed Jew for the first time thanks to Ann Coulter.
I became a believer in Jesus at the age of 16, coming out of a lifestyle of heavy drug use and rebellion. As far as I was concerned, I found the truth. As for Judaism, I grew up with that, and based on my personal experience, it was dead. Now I had discovered the real faith. But then I made another interesting discovery. The rabbi of the synagogue where I had been bar mitzvahed told me that the Judaism I grew up with was not the real thing, that I had never really experienced Judaism. I'd never thought of that before. You see, growing up in a conservative Jewish home on Long Island, I thought that's the only Judaism there was. Yeah, I had heard about some Jews, some Orthodox Jews in the next town, and they rigidly kept the Sabbath and wouldn't eat pork, but I was told they were crazy. Let me tell you what the spiritual level was in our community. The men that attended the Sabbath services would drive the car to the synagogue and stop 1 block away and park there and walk the rest of the way. Why? Because according to Jewish tradition, it's forbidden to drive on the Sabbath, so they had to give the appearance of keeping the law by walking the rest of the way. It was only the rabbi who was considered more spiritual who would actually walk the whole way to and from the synagogue. Now, it's also forbidden to smoke on the Sabbath, but this was no problem for the guys. They'd go downstairs, light up, and enjoy a nice after-service meal, and when they heard the rabbi's footsteps, they'd quickly take their cigarettes and give them to the Gentile custodian, Walter. I'm telling you, more than a few times, the rabbi came, and there's Walter puffing away at several cigarettes at the same time. This is what I grew up with. This is what I understood was the level of spirituality. In fact, our synagogue only seated about 200 people, and yet on many Saturdays, they didn't even have 10 men, which is the minimum requirement for a Jewish prayer service. So they'd call my dad and say, "Abe, can you bail us out?" And he'd drive over in a hurry and be the 10th man. That's the Judaism I knew growing up.
Let's get some opinions on our topic. Is Judaism an incomplete religion?
Well, clearly not if you're Jewish, and if you're a Christian, then yes, but then Christianity is an incomplete religion if you're Muslim.
I think every religion is completed in its own form.
So was the Judaism that I grew up with incomplete? Absolutely. That's why it was such a surprise to me as a fervent 18-year-old believer in Jesus to go to Brooklyn and meet religious Jews who seemed to be just as committed to God as I was. Spiritually minded Jews. That was something new to me. mean, these men, their devotion seemed sincere, their lives seemed rich, they talked about faith, they talked about holy living, they talked about the Messiah, but they were sure it wasn't Jesus. And instead of going to synagogue just a few days a year, they went every single day to pray. Did these men need to be perfected? Was their religion incomplete? Actually, the more I learned about Judaism, the more I found out how comprehensive it was. The traditions really cover everything. I mean, your whole life is sketched out from the moment you're born to the moment you die, with laws and customs from birth to burial, even laws for mourning and grieving too. There are prayers that you say when you wake up in the morning. There are prayers you say before and after meals, and they vary depending on what foods you've eaten. There are prayers you say when you go to the bathroom. There are prayers you say the first time you see someone who's lost a loved one. There are even prayers you say when you see a good-looking person. How is this religion incomplete? There are beautiful traditions regarding the observance of the Sabbath and the holy days. There's even an annual cycle of reading the scriptures that covers every day of the year. And Jews worldwide follow this. As for Jewish law, it answers questions most of us never even think of asking. So how is it that people believe that Judaism without faith in Jesus is incomplete? Where did this idea come from?
Coming up next.
There's really no complete Judaism. Like, my family calls us traditional. Unless you're, like, a radical, like, no one follows every single law. There's 613 of them. You can't.
Some Jewish followers of Jesus prefer to be called completed Jews rather than Jewish Christians, which implies that Judaism without Jesus is incomplete, meaning that Judaism is an incomplete religion. Well, this is highly offensive to most Jews, and I can understand why. The fact is, as Jews, we've been hated more severely, persecuted longer than any other people group, yet we're still here a few thousand years later, vibrant and strong. And for most of our history, it's been Judaism that's preserved us. How then can that be called incomplete? We've been offered baptism or death, conversion to Islam or death, submission to godless communism or death. And over again, our forefathers chose death rather than compromise. It was because of their faith, because of the Jewish religion. How then is this incomplete? Just think of the Holocaust. The suffering endured by millions of our people is unimaginable. And while it's true that some Jews completely lost their faith during the Holocaust, it's also true that many Jews were sustained by their faith in the midst of a living hell, and their faith was remarkable. One of the most moving books I have was written by an Orthodox rabbi named Ephraim Oshry, giving legal rulings to religious Jews during those oppressive days. One family asked the rabbi if they could obtain falsified Christian baptismal certificates just to save their lives. The rabbi replied,
"A baptismal certificate has only one connotation, that the owner of the certificate has, God forbid, forsaken his Creator and denied his people, the people God has chosen as his treasure."
And the family complied. That is devotion to Judaism.
Let's go ahead and throw this question out to some New Yorkers. Does faith in Jesus offer anything that Judaism does not?
Not in particular, no.
I'm not a religious person, but I definitely think that the story of Jesus offers a lot of good lessons.
Every day, religious Jews pray a special prayer called the Amida, which means standing, since it's recited in a standing position. It's also called the Shemona Esrei, which means 18, because originally there were 18 main benedictions. These benedictions, or prayers, reflect the corporate longing of the Jewish soul. Every day, religious Jews pray for the redemption of our people and for the coming of our Messiah, for the rebuilding of the temple, among other things. And these prayers are very revealing. They reveal the cry of our heart and that longing of our souls. Something's missing. There's a void of some kind. And we're asking God to come and fill that void. One prayer asks for this:
"Be favorable, O Lord our God, toward your people Israel, and toward their prayer, and restore the service to the Holy of Holies of your temple, the fire offerings of Israel, and their prayer accept with love and favor, and may the service of your people Israel always be favorable to you."
Or consider this related prayer:
"May it be your will, O Lord our God, and the God of our forefathers, that you have mercy on us, and pardon us for all our errors. Atone for us all our iniquities, forgive all our willful sins, and that you rebuild the holy temple speedily in our days, so that we may offer to you the continual offering, that it may atone for us, as you have prescribed for us in your Torah through Moses, your servant.
How interesting. Religious Jews daily pray for the rebuilding of the temple so that offerings of atonement may be sacrificed again. A traditional commentary even explains it like this.
We're about to begin offering our communal sacrifices, as it were. Before doing so, we recite a brief prayer that God end the exile and make it possible for us to offer the true offerings, not just the recitations that take their place.
So despite the beauty of our traditions, despite the richness of our Torah, despite the comprehensive nature of Judaism, something's still missing, at least on a corporate level. The exile remains, even with the modern state of Israel. We still pray for the rebuilding of the temple and the restoration of the temple sacrifices. What does this imply?
Dr. Brown came upon these people with Golda Meir t-shirts and wanted to chat.
So what religion were you raised in?
Judaism. Yeah, conservative Jewish.
Conservative Jewish. So, okay. So how many of you would go to synagogue regularly, every Saturday?
Every Saturday.
You're little? Okay. What about the dietary laws?
While I was in Israel, I kept kosher for the year just to take advantage of the surroundings, but now I don't.
You know, okay, what about the rest of you?
When I was little, I didn't at all, but when I turned 10, I decided that I wanted to keep kosher, and I have been kosher ever since.
Okay, interesting. What about you?
My family's always been kosher.
Okay, so you've just grown up.
We did non-kosher restaurants, but only dairy.
Okay, all right. So you're pretty strict with that.
Same.
So you don't embrace all the traditions, but a lot of them.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've ever met Jews for Jesus or people like that, but they'll talk about being completed Jews. That would imply that Judaism is somehow incomplete. What do you feel when you hear something like that? How does that strike you?
I don't even know. It just kind of angers me a bit.
A little bit offensive.
Yeah.
There's no such thing as complete Judaism, and no one, unless you're a radical, no one follows every single law. There's 613 of them. You can't. And so, I think there's really no complete Judaism. My family calls us traditional. We keep kosher and we observe most of Shabbos, but I'll write on Shabbos and on Shabbat, Sabbath, and I'll sometimes drive. But so you're traditional. We value Judaism. We value the laws and the Jewish laws.
Now, do you feel that you're still young, you haven't raised your own families yet, but within Judaism, do you feel for you that it's complete, or is there ever a sense that there's something missing or there's something more you're looking for?
I think there's always something that you can learn from Judaism that I haven't learned. I was in Israel for the year, and I think I learned a lot. And living in Israel, it's a completely different type of Judaism. You're surrounded by Jews all the time. And in a sense, you feel more comfortable with them. And, I come back to Manhattan, and, there's a lot of Jews in Manhattan, but yeah, it's very different.
I'm so glad to be able to get to talk with those young Jewish people, especially right after coming back from Israel. And, it reminds you that Judaism is not just religion, spirituality, but it's a way of life. From the dietary laws to the cycle of life and synagogue attendance, it's a family-based religion. And in many ways, you could see that these kids just coming back from Israel were even more touched by it. And for some, it's a very positive and special heritage. But, there's something beyond that. And that's interesting to me, too, because when I asked about Judaism being complete, they said, well, how could any religion be complete? Oh, they weren't saying there's anything wrong with Judaism. They seem to enjoy being Jewish. But the question about Judaism being complete was something that struck a chord. On the one hand, they were not that happy with the concept of Jews who follow Jesus calling themselves completed Jews because it made Judaism seem negative. But the question about Judaism being complete in itself, that raised something interesting.
Still to come.
How can a person have a solid relationship with God? There's so much horrible things happening in the world and so many good things at the same time that it's hard to have a solid relationship.